Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with me here today. My name is Ellie. I am social media manager at PharmaPast. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about my hometown, which is Rhyl. And although I wasn't born in Rhyl, I did call it my home for well over a decade while I was growing up. And there were a handful of things I thought I knew about my hometown, and many of these were because I did a project on Rhyl while I was at school, and needless to say, not a lot of it has actually stayed in my head, but this is what I do remember. So Rhyl is younger than the neighbouring and medieval Rhuddlan. It found its feet with the rise of Victorian seaside holidaying. Its heyday was when the railway arrived in 1848, and I do always remember that date. It used to have a much older pavilion, and in fact, I think it's gone through about two or three, and it used to have a domed one, I think. And from memory, at some point, they thought they saw a crack in the roof. So for safety reasons, they demolished it, and then they realised that the crack was actually just a shadow, so they demolished it for no reason, which was a shame. And as well, from the mid-1930s, my father's family called Rhyl home. And I felt like I knew my hometown, right? This is somewhere where I spent 10, 11 years of my life when I was young. I remember walking along the promenade and enjoying the beach and things like that. And I know that it used to be a much smaller, sleepy settlement before it became a fashionable seaside resort. And I started to think, like, what caused that to boom? Were my original assumptions even correct? So I decided to set to work, and I decided to tap into one of my all-time favourite historical resources, newspapers. And you get to come along for the ride. In case you're not sure where Rhyl is, here it is on a map for you of the UK, sitting lovely and prettily on the North Wales coastline. And if you just want to have a look at this historical map, which is the earliest one I can find with Rhyl on, it's from 1819, and you can see Rhyl to the north here. It's not a developed town yet, especially in comparison with Rhuddlan, which I've also marked, which is to the south. And today Rhyl is actually much larger than Rhuddlan, and Rhuddlan's much, much older. As I said, there has been a settlement in Rhyl since before it became a seaside resort, evidenced here by this 17th century house called Teen Rhyl. It's supposedly Rhyl's oldest house, and I think it's now still a restaurant because I have definitely been there before for centre lunch. It's very, very tasty. So this is my starting point. I've got an old house. I know it was once a sleepy settlement, and I know at some point the railways arrived and it became a hip and happening seaside resort. But how on earth did it get there? It didn't happen overnight, and were my original assumptions correct? So my method of research was, at least at first, reasonably simple. I headed to an online newspaper archive, and of course I used PharmaPast, and I added in Rhyl as a keyword, as you can see here. Then when I came to my results, I sorted by the oldest newspapers possible, which you can see here on the right-hand side. And that for my search landed me in a year range of 1750 to 1799. And that is what I added here. So this is what I delved into first. And immediately I was so excited because I had it in my head that Rhyl was a product of the Victorian era. And yet I've got much earlier mentions, even for some tiny, sleepy settlements that probably had one house and a handful of farms. So this is what I found, and there's a lot to get through in just 10 minutes, so this is going to be really interesting. This was the oldest mention of Rhyl I could find in what PharmaPast currently has in its 80 million page plus strong newspaper archive. It's from the Chester Courier in 1768. This is 80 years before the arrival of the railways. It's an advertisement for the sale of a property in Rhyl, and it says it's been between the town of Rhuddlan and the port of Borrid in the county of Flint called Kevin Dhu, worth £9 and upwards in an ancient setting. And it also says it's capable of advancement and improvement. And that's really the key thing for me here. This is the tiny, sleepy settlement of a few farms and maybe a small fishing community. And this is all the way back in the time of George III. And here, somebody saw this area as an opportunity. Along the way, I created a collection of PharmaPast to collect my findings because it means I can clip out the articles and save them. It's a little bit like Pinterest for newspapers, and now I can stay super organized. Now, we don't really see much of Rhyl in the Georgian press for another 15 years or so. There is a mention of a new postal coach at one point that refers to Rhyllon, but I reckon that actually refers to Rhyddlan as opposed to Rhyl. So the next mention I find on the left-hand side here is in 1794, and it starts to talk about the development of the marshlands near Rhyddlan. Notice was given that special surveyors were employed for the embanking of the sea coast and the marshes. And this actually covers a broad area. You're talking Abergele along the coast to the west and then Melodin along the coast to the east. But what is in the middle of these? Modern day Rhyl. This is the first mention I can find of the once marshy lands there being developed. And then this mention on the right-hand side, this is 1803 now, and this is some buying and selling of property. So you've got a dwelling house with outbuildings called Penaril with a garden. You've got some quillets, which are small plots of land. And then you've got a smithy and a cottage. And you've also got some people named. You've got a tenant as John Barker. You've got a tenant, Widow Fout, for example. And you've also got mention of a new drain being cut through Rhyl Marsh. So this is great. We're getting somewhere here. But what about Rhyl as a bathing resort? When did that first come into play? And it's still earlier than I first thought. We are still in the Georgian times here. We are in 1807 with this little notice. This talks about Rhyddlan marshland, an eligible situation for sea bathing, 20 acres of rich common marshland on Rhyl Marsh. That's quite interesting. And then we get some new stuff as well. Rhyl really starts to boom from here. So it's still in its infancy. We're still in the Georgian period, and we see the first example of a ball I can find in Rhyl in 1819, with people of note visiting this most fashionable bathing resort. I don't think that would have been happening if it was still the sleepy little settlement with just a few farms. It's already advancing. As somebody who grew up in Rhyl, I'm absolutely no stranger to scathing remarks about it, and I've even uttered a few in my time. But I did not expect to find the first criticisms to be from 1819. This is over 200 years ago, and it says the place is destitute of every requisite to give it a claim to the appellation of a watering place, and it describes the locals as their houses being very dirty to a miracle, is the exact quote. And we also get an example of the first properties being let for the bathing season as well. But we do get a nice review too. This is from 1824, and it remarks on Rhyl's location, its close proximity to the mountains, the golden sands of the beach, and how there's just one hotel at this point. But there are lodging houses, the accommodation is improving according to this, and there's a ballroom floor being constructed, and also another hotel is on the way. And we do get that new hotel as well. That opens in 1826 with its housewarming. We've got a new coach service that starts in 1827, and then even more residences are available to rent during the summer season, such as this one from 1826 for Morva Lodge and its nearby cottage, and perhaps owned by this Mr. Sisson here of Plascoch in St Asaph. We get our first wedding announcement in the newspapers in 1827, where a Miss Sarah Monk of Rhyl married Thomas Gammon in Aldford. And then this is pretty cool. We get a royal visitor in 1828. The Duke of Sussex visited Rhyl. He stayed at the hotel along with his entourage. Now, this is Prince Augustus Frederick. He was the sixth son and the ninth child of King George III and Queen Charlotte, and he was the favourite uncle of Queen Victoria. So I thought this was pretty cool. This is an early stamp of approval from a royal. Did this help? Like I never knew this before. Did this help Rhyl take off? Some more firsts. Potentially Ryl's first recorded crime to hit the newspapers happened in 1829, where several men improperly seized a cow. So yeah, big headline there. The first lifeboat discussions I could find were in 1835. This writer to the Liverpool Mercury was concerned about the weather along the North Wales coast, Many crews had perished because there was a steamboat that was coming from Liverpool to Rhyl. And also, imagine these early visitors coming to this brand new seaside resort. They may not have been able to swim very well, if at all. So the lifeboat discussions came along. And then we've got evidence of a new church being consecrated as well in 1836, because before this, Rhyl had no church. Worshippers would have needed to have gone to nearby Rydlan. And this first church was Holy Trinity, and it held services in Welsh. And then we finally get to the huge moment that I wanted to get to, the arrival of the railways in Rhyl in May 1848. And actually in 1847, on the left-hand side here, we get a mention of the first station buildings being built in Rhyl, in addition to the other towns along the North Wales coast. So construction is happening. But then we get to 1848 in May in the newspapers, and I can't find anything. Honestly, I was expecting a bit of a big bang when the railways first arrived in Rhyl. It would have been a novelty, right? But there was hardly anything. And maybe they just weren't that obsessed with it at the time. Rhyl already had coach travel and steamboats. And this Chester to Holyhead line wasn't necessarily built for passenger traffic. It was actually to improve government communication between England and Ireland. So perhaps it was only later that the effect of the railway on the expansion of Rhyl became truly apparent. We do get more talk of it in the newspapers in July and August, probably because that's when most of the people coming to visit Rhyl would have started using the service. So maybe it's only then that it becomes a bigger talking point. I thought you might also like to know that at one point the Prince and Princess of Wales visited Rhyl in 1894 and oversaw the foundation of the new Royal Alexandra Children's Hospital and Convalescent Home. They also used Rhyl railway station, and this was during a visit to Penrhyn Castle for the Eisteddfod at Carnarvon. And at this point, the Prince and Princess of Wales were Bertie and Alexandra, later King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. Some more fun stuff that I thought you might like to know. The first post office actually opened the same year as the railway in 1848, which I did not know beforehand. We've got the rightful queen of all gypsies, Esmeralda Groom, died at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in 1939. She was a bit of a celebrity, actually. She lived in Prestatyn for the latter part of her life, and she was hit during a road accident, and then she was taken to the Royal Alex, where she sadly died, and she was about 85. And then Rhyl was also at the centre of a really scandalous trial in 1909. I love this story. Fake heiress Violet Charlesworth, who called Rhyl home for a time, faked her own death on the North Wales coastline, only to be later tracked down in Scotland. Her story is utterly fascinating. I really recommend you looking it up. And I really could go on with the building of the pier, the theatres, what Rhyl looked like when my family first moved there in the 1930s, where it took in refugees in the First and Second World War, but we'll have to save that for another time. And just to finish, I thought you might like to see some historical photos of Rhyl. We've got the pavilion and the pier here in 1867. We've got the burning of the pavilion in 1901. We've got some donkey riders on the beach in 1913. It's not really a thing anymore, but I do remember these happening when I was a child. You've got Rhyl Pier being destroyed in a gale in 1909. I probably should say as well, Rhyl no longer has a pier. That I think was demolished at some point. This really stunning shot of the beach with the pavilion in the background in 1939. I really love that. And then we've got the miniature railway as well, pictured here in the sketch in 1914. And just some cute little drawings of St Thomas's Church. I wanted to include these because although St Thomas's came later in the 1860s, a lot of family christenings, weddings and funerals have happened in this church. So I wanted to include those as well. So what did I learn along the way? The Rhyl, as I know, started to flourish 80 years before I thought it did. That's a long time. Location is so vital. Somebody along the way saw an opportunity with Rhyl Marsh and grasped it, and it started a chain of events that led Rhyl to becoming a really, really fashionable seaside resort. We absolutely shouldn't discount the small settlement that was already there in 1768. I do wonder as well what those living there would have thought of the town's growth. The royal stamp of approval happened really early on, 1828. And how did that actually contribute to the early success of the town? And sadly, the arrival of the railway was not, it seems, considered a huge thing in May 1848. It was talked about some months later, maybe as the summer tourists began to arrive. And what can you take away from this? So I thought Rhyl was born in 1848 and I was wrong. And I was happy to be wrong. There was so much else for me to explore. Question what you already know. Question what you think you know. You should definitely take newspapers with a pinch of salt. While they are a fantastic resource for local history, family history, crime, fashion, sport, they're just brilliant. There's so much you can find out with them, and you should also stay nice and organised with collections. And if you don't delve into the newspapers, have fun with it. What are the quirky things you can find in addition to the big events? If I had just gone in the search for the railways, I would have missed so much. So allow yourself to research out of your main zone of interest. Go off the beaten track a bit and think outside the box. And if you'd like to check out my Welcome to Sunny Rhyl collection, my research file, if you will, you can explore it for free on Find My Past by scanning this little QR code with your mobile device. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've learned something. Yeah, thank you. Bye.